Good evening, welcome in RNQ classes. Classes. Ep- Epistemology, block number 1. Block number 1, introduction, unit number 4. Theories of truth and error. Western objectives to familiarize the students with the four main theories of truth from Eastern and Western perspectives, to encourage them to question the sources of truth and error is knowledge. Introduction. How do I know? Can I be sure of the various ways of acquiring knowledge? How is error related to truth? In this unit, we see mainly the different classical theories of truth and reflect on them philosophically. We take only four main theories of truth as given in Western philosophy and give a critical account of them, where we introduce some related intent concept to 4.2. The correspondence theory. The theory says that truth, the indications of the mind of the object. In other words, truth is the correspondence itself between what I affirm or deny or to what is really the case. This has been our provisional understandings of truth. The majority of Indian schools of philosophy agree that Brahma knowledge must correspond to what really the object of knowledge is in itself. Some however raise the questions: how can I know that what I can affirm or deny really corresponds to what the case is? In another words, how can I know that the object as known corresponds to the object as it is in itself? For if I have to turn my attentions to this very correspondence, I would still know as it as known, but would in its turn correspond to what it is in itself, and so on and so forth and infinitum. I can't jump out of any mind as it were so as to be able to compare what I know and the object of my knowledge as it is in self, and thus to see whether they correspond to each other or not. Kant holds that we do not need to worry, since we can never know the object as it is in itself. Noumenian, for this remains always known and knowledgeable. We can only know the object as known phenomenon as it appears to you and molded by certain forms of your mind categories. The scholastics say, don't worry, you do know the object as it is in itself. In fact, the object as known as is really a kind of sign in which a signum q, not the image of the object as it is in itself is known, but directly the object itself. On this particular topic, the Indian schools of philosophy are also divided. Two main trends appear. One says that truth is self-validating, Savatha Pramanyavada. The other says that truth has to be validated by something other than itself. Paratah Pramanyavada. We do not intend to enter into the details of these two trends. The former is the best represented by Samakhya, Mimamsa, and Vedanta. The latter by the Nyaya Vaisesika. But the way of understand correspondence is to see in it is the definition of what we mean by truth, and not as some modern commentators of Nyaya, for example, as a test of truth. We make use to the test or proof to see whether the judgment or propositions is true or false. If I manage to obtain sufficient and necessary evidence, then I know that the judgment is true. Otherwise, I may either still be doubtful, or if the evidence is sufficient and necessary, that my judgment is false. I know that it is false, but then supposing that I know fully known that my judgment is true. Judgment is false. I know that it is false, but the supposing that I know fully know that my judgment is true, I do not need to have tested the already established truth of my judgment by some other non-cognitive means. Example, by its usefulness. If I do still feel the need to have further test, it it means that I am still doubtful about whether my judgment is true or false, and if I simply want to show why not whether my judgment is true, then I have to initiate a process of reasoning which I can come to see family rest not any non-cognitive consideration, example usefulness, but on some self-evident truth. Still, some fail to disentangle themselves from the difficulty regarding the possibility of us ascertaining whether the correspondence itself is true or false, or simply whether it is true at all. For it may happen that I am not be able to see that it is false, and yet I am not be able to see that it is true either. So they seek to find some other meaning of truth. The epistemological difficulty leads them to search the semantic questions differently. Notice already the two semantic and metaphysical questions getting involved with each other. 4.3, the pragmatic theory. Pragmatism, from Greek pragma, is the doctrine attained to thought, according to which is the value of assertion. Assertion lies solely in its practical being upon human interest. In this sense, it can also be called utilitarianism, from Latin utilis, useful. So consequently, suppose I ask whether it is true that fire heats, the pragmatics would answer, well, if you put water or food on it, will it heat or not? The answer is definitely yes. So according to the pragmatics, all you need to know to see whether what you are saying is the true or false is whether it serves you a good purpose. If it does, it is true. If it does not, it is useful. Or more preciously still, the question whether fire heats corresponds to objects, facts or not, is either considered as impossible to ascertain or as useless. At first sight, this may seem a very attractive and practical idea. If universally applied, it can does have disastrous consequences not only in the realm of philosophy, but and especially in that of religion, as we are going to see. Still, a lot can be learned from such a trend or thought. In the West known for in the West known for pursuing such a trend of thought as C.S. Peirce, the father of modern pragmatism and the coiner of the term. J. Dewey, calling his philosophy instrumentalism, and William James C.S. Peirce, a scientist and logician, applied his theory mostly to scientific assertions and also ethics. If a proposition fails, results in the field of scientific inquiry, and as such is accepted by the scientific community, that proposition is true. Jayaswari applies his doctrine not only to scientific assumptions and thus to the formations of scientific theory, but also to all assertions we use in the solutions of everyday problems. If our solutions are useful and if our theories by which we try to reconstruct the ever-changing flow of life are verified by life itself, our solutions and theories can be called true. William James speaks more in terms of meaning or view of life. If an assertion and the view of life, which is thus made up of such assertions, functions satisfactorily in my life, if in other words it gives meaning and purpose up to my life, that then that assertion and view of life and true. Of course, they may be true to me and not to you. James applies to me, not to you. James applies this also a religious propositions expressive of religion's beliefs, and in this he is followed by others more recent thinkers, of whom we shall speak later in a related but different context. A lot can be learned from an epistemological pragmatic approach to truth. We can speak of the value for working hypotheses in scientific inquiry. Not only that, but as we point out too, the set of hypotheses which make up a theory, and these two in religious knowledge, one can't really ask whether they are true or false, but whether they are appropriate or inappropriate, arbitrary or well grounded, reasonable or not, till of course reasons ultimately founded on some self evident truth. Do not provide sufficient evidence to provide them true or false. They are to be considered true in this pragmatic sense. Truth is here understood rightly as usefulness, reality. After all, from the smallest of atom to the highest God is so mysterious, at times so puzzling, that we have to be humble enough to admit that in most things we know things only in so far as we can, and in accordance that with our limited capacity of knowing. This approach for from being a skeptic on or purely subjectivistic one equips on with a certain oneness to ever present but ever eluding truth. As H.T. Agenstein says, we find to look again. Much of our knowledge of reality is a constructions of it in such a way as to make it intangible to us, but in such a way to that remains always provisional, hypothetical, and this is particularly true when from the level of facts we pass on to the level of their significance, that there is a somebody in front of me is fact, and it is a fact who that sees of such and such descriptions. But is it a fact that she is the most beautiful girl in the world? Is this in this a propositional judgment subject to be proved true or false? If not, is it not true to anybody, including to her passionate lover? If it is true to him, what is meant by true here? Does it not mean significant? Take such other judgments. My work is my life, my family is my world, love is my breath. Humanity is a community. History has a purpose. Good and evil are in perfect harmony. God is a loving Father. What is true here and what is false? Further still, what does it profit a man to know all the is to know if finally all his knowledge savors him for nothing, least of all to be or become what he is supposed to be or become? Can I really call that true, that is genuine worthwhile knowledge? If not, what is then knowledge? It is not the purposeful knowledge, that knowledge which alone can serve him truly and to achieve this final destiny. And what is the meaning here of true and truly? It is not that knowledge which serves no useful purpose, which does not or can't result in a fruitful activity, a trial knowledge. And if it is, can it still be called true knowledge? All this is, of course, is true and profoundly so. So we shall return to these questions later when we shall deal with language and its functions, especially religious language, but from the epistemologically standpoint, the pragmatic theory of truth needs, according to us, to be severely qualified. Firstly, scientific knowledge and scientific truth can't without much further ado be taken to be the paradigm of knowledge and truth in general. To do so would presuppose certain prepositions which would be themselves subject to non-scientific proof, and hence to a non-pragmatic concept of knowledge and truth. Secondly, from a semantic point of view, it would be arbitrary to define truth speculatively, since there is a conventional everyday meaning of them term. All one could say is that in such and such field of knowledge, or in any kind of hypothesis, it would be inappropriate to speak of truth, but on something else, something which we did ourselves, or that in such a case one can't come to know the truth of. Thirdly, from a religious point of view, belief, no matter how significant it is or should be would lose all its religious value and therefore its significance if it could be shown to rest on no real foundation, that is, with a basis in literally. A false conviction may still be significant to somebody, but does not make it true. Fourthly, to say that truth is relative, that is known only progressively and in accordance with the capacity and interpretations of the known, and as significant to him or not. So it's only that one has to distinguish between different fields of knowledge, different functions of language, different levels of understanding, different kinds of illustrations, relativism, which says that no objective truth can be known to all, and therefore in no sense at all can no say to be absolutely certain about anything can be shown to be like skepticism, evidently self-contradictory. 4.4. The coherence theory. Because of the difficulty we discussed with regard to the correspondence theory, some interpret truth as coherence between a propositions and other well established true propositions if it can be shown that these prepositions does not contradict these well established propositions. It can a proposition is true, it can be called true as a clear. The theory presuppose that before we start asking ourselves whether a preposition is true, we should have already agreed explicitly or implicitly or on certain propositions as being true. For example, we ask ourselves whether the prepositions abortion is murder is true or false. We shall have first to agree on whether the following prepositions also true or false, namely to kill a person unnecessarily is murder. The unborn child is a person. Abortion is to kill a person unnecessarily. Now, supposing that we agree that these propositions are true, it follows that our original propositions can be seen to the true. In other words, it is logically implied by, not in a conflict with, a clause with the previously agreed upon truths. In its simplest form, the theory equates truth with logical positivism, as could expected. Logical positivism, about which we shall be speaking later, renounces all idea of truth as correspondence with facts and interprets it as correspondence or occurrence with presuppositions themselves, or to put it differently, for it the fact are the propositions themselves, but in its More radicals from this theory is the epistemological aspect of that more general theory, according to which the laws of thought are not only are the laws of beings itself in the sense that they correspond to them, but are the laws of being in the sense that they are their origin. So their origin, so the primacy is given not to be giving over thought but to thought will a capital T over all beings. And if chapter essentially consistent that if one could walk out a logically consistent view of really, this must necessarily reflect reality as it is in fact, and the given propositions on a judgment if it coheres with his whole logically consistent view of reality is true. Otherwise, false idealism example that a Spinoza Hegel in the West to a certain extent that a Sankara in India. Here again we have a lot of learn from this history when a judgment is expressed in a propositions which are made up of concepts, notions, etc. is expressed in fact in a particular linguistic field where not only the truth of the propositions but also the meaning of the concepts themselves are mutually related, and there are more than one linguistic field, or as it is sometimes called universe of discourse such as the scientific, the aesthetic, the legal, the economical, the moral, the religious, etc. For example, prepositions human being is composed of body and soul may be true in a scholastic philosophical linguistic field where human being composed his body and soul have a specific meaning, and the truth of the judgment depends on the truth of many other related judgments, like being a composed of matter and form. Spiritual act can't intrinsically depend on matter, etc. But same prepositions may be either false or at least on in, unintelligible in another in linguistic field, as as in Semichus or in materialism, etc. Prepositions in an Euclidean geometrical in linguistic field may be false or unintelligible in a non-Euclidean one. Logical prepositions in a two-valued logical linguistic field may be false in a three-valued logical one, etc. In philosophy of religion, we take pains to show how to religious tenet. Example: Christ is the Son of God in Christianity, or Atman is Brahman in Vedanta can either be made intangible and much less said to be true or false. True or false expect within the whole constraint of this respective religious tradition, which is as it were its matrix. Hence the meaninglessness of trying to understand a text out of its context, hence to the misunderstandings which can arise of if one try to compare and contrast different philosophical, religious, etc. opinions, belief, doctrines before one has made sure that one has first understood each and its respective linguistic field. All this is therefore very true. Still, does logical coherence enough to say that something is true in the generally accepted meaning of the term. We have already remarked that to give a stipulative definitions to an already conventionally agreed upon meaning of term is arbitrary. But apart from this semantic questions, it is clear the proponents of the logical coherence theory of truth are led to such a definitions of thus because of the epistemological difficulty we discussed with regard to the correspondence theory more directly. Still, one should point out that this theory does not solve the same difficulty for its prepositions. That before we start asking whether prepositions is true or not, we have to have already agreed to consider other prepositions as true, because that we would have already settled and logical coherence of each of these latter prepositions will with still other prepositions. The infinite regress would be required here too, and it would be no answer to say that as a matter of fact we inherit the truth of these prepositions from society. The question here is not how in fact become to know from the time of our childhood up, but how we can philosophically understand truth. Recall that we too required self consistency and tolerance in any good that is appropriate hypothesis, but we added to that preciously, because as such a hypothesis remains a hypothesis, it would be out of place to ask whether it is true or false, or in other words, we did not consider hypothesis as such, in spite of its logical self-consistency and coherence, necessarily true. So, will true canon in the formal science, logic, mathematics are considered to be the equivalent of logical concepts precisely because formal sciences, by their very nature, do not refer to a specific object, fact, state of affairs. It can't be considered elsewhere. So can we at last agree that if a whole system of philosophical understanding of reality that is not simply of prepositions, it is in fact self-consistent and coherent. It does mirror. It is idealism believes. The difficulty here is that it is not impossible to imagine two perfectly self-consistent and coherent systems of the sort which are not compatible among themselves, or even contradictory to one another. In this case, when we have two or even more such systems, the questions arise which the them is on to call true. Supposing that in virtue of the principle of contradictions they can't be all called true, there could be many answers to the questions. One could, for example, say that on further analysis, one can always discern in what one had a first sight mistaken to be a perfectly self-consistent and coherent theory inconsistencies in such a way that one could finally realize that there can be only one logically self-consistent and coherent view of reality, or one could answer reality can in fact be mirrored in two or more such systems, provided that they're perfectly self-consistent and coherent, even though they are not compatible but not contradictory. Again one could answer that what seems to be contradictory on a logical epistemological level need to be contradictory on the methodological trends empirical level, that is the level of reality as a whole in its ultimate causes, etc. All this would be interesting to discuss as we do in philosophy of religion, but it is clear that ultimately on the epistemological level itself consistent and coherent view of reality is to be said of to be true, whether or not it is the only possible one or not. It is not just because it is so beautiful, but because it would have been shown to correspond to what the case is, that is to the nature and structure, etc. of reality itself. 4.5, the performative theory. To understand this theory, we must go back to what we said about illustrations. We recall that these are kinds of speech acts which we do perform when we say something. Now when I say, for example, it is true that the word is round. Do I do anything more than when I say the word is found according to some according to some example. P.F. Rami say, I am certainly not giving any more information about the world in the first case than in the second. All I am doing more when I add information, when I add it is true that is adding emphasis, style, or indications as to the position the statement has in the whole of my argument. Others, however, are not so in remarking that this is a confusion between a first order assertion. In our case, the world is round, where something is said or stated about the world, and a second order assertions in our course. It is true that the world is round, where something is said or stated about the whole propositions as a whole, namely the world is round. Now some philosophers like P.F. Strawon will pointing out that true or false occur only in a second order assertions. See in the use of them. True, a sign of the speaker's affirmations, and in the use of them, false of his denial. Thus, to keep to our examples, when I say it is true that the world is found, is true. What I am doing is indicating that I agree, believe, I am convinced, consent, affirm that the world is round. Hence, the performative functions of the term true and correspondingly of the term false. The distinction between first order assertions and second order assertions is useful and well made. In logic, we speak of the distinction between first intentions and second intention, but that was with regard to concept. As a second intentions concept is a concept of a concept, so to a second order so assertion is an assertion of an assertion. In the world is round, the logical term of the proposition serving as its subject, that we something is said about is the word in the proposition that the world is round is true. The logical term is not the world but the whole proposition. The world is round. Something is said about his whole propositions, and what is said is that it corresponds to what the case is. Now it is undoubtable that true that when I say it is true that the world is round, I am doing something more than giving information about the world. I am doing something more, namely I am indicating that I too believe, affirm, agree, etc. That the world is round. It won't make no sense to say it is true that the world is round, but I do not believe it, or I am not convinced of it. If it was not convinced of it, it would not say that it is true in the first place. Not only are the two propositions not identical, but illusionary load is different, whereas the world is round has one illusion, a constative. It is true that the world is round has two, the constative and the expressive. The former affirming something about the world, the latter expressing some attitude, in this case of belief, agreement, conviction, etc. of the one who affirms. It is only of constatives that the questions of truth arises, as we have seen. So by reducing a constructive to an expressive is neither logically nor etymologically sound, and the questions of the truth remains unsolved. Other authors, example Isaiah, similarly reduces moral preposition. Example, Watson is murder. Aesthetic preposition. Example, this girl is beautiful. Indeed, religious preposition. Example, God exists. To more aggressively, we shall return to him later. But the same criticism could be addressed to him as the one we are addressing to the performative, the theory of truth in general. Still one big lesson we could learn from it is that even in religious Language prepositions do often have a big expressive illusionary load and not simply constructive. When I say, for example, God is a loving father, I am not simply making a statement or of fact or of an alleged fact, but I am expressing some attitude or attitudes of mind. 4.6 Truth and Error. When one discusses truth, one can't help mentioning falsehood is the opposite of truth in all senses, ontological, moral, and logical. If in the logical or epistemological sense, truth is the correspondence between what is affirmed or denied to what the case falsehood in the same sense in the non-correspondence between the two. If a true judgment or propositions is that which corresponds to what the case is a false judgment or propositions that which does not exist, and if the truth lies strictly speaking in the judgment, as we have said, so does falsehood. Now, how when I pass a true judgment, I am right. When I pass a false judgment, I am wrong. In the latter case, I commit an error. I am mistaken. The very possibility of perceptual error could at least partially account for the many trends in Western philosophy. We sought to base knowledge, or at last to finally explain it, or on purely rational grounds and not on perceptions. We already have had the occasion to touch on this point in a different context when we refer to rationalism and the fundamental role of reason in the reconstructions of the objects of perceptions. But in this particular context, we wish to refer to all kinds of trend of thought in Western philosophy, which in kind of leadest way sought to base knowledge on an appreciation of universal and abiding ideas like Plato or on some absolutely sure and indubitable, clear and distinct ideas like Descartes, or in a different sense on the priori forms of the mind itself like Kant, etc. All of these distrusting the reliability of sense perception because of the possibility of perceptual error and ever shifting nature of our knowledge based on sense objects and perception looked for a solid footing for knowledge, seeing that the formal signs do not depend on sense perceptions for that truth and justification. Spinoza tried to build up his whole philosophy in the manner of geometry, starting with axioms and definitions and proceeding with theorems and modern logical positivists do not hesitate to take mathematics as the paradigm of all knowledge. Speaking of sense perception, no matter how perceptual error is to be explained, it is to be noted that if we can speak of perceptual error or it, that is if we somehow or other can some to detect it and show that it is an error, it is because paradoxically enough sense perception is fundamentally reliable. In English, however, be error, we do not mean perceptual error alone. We can commit errors, be mistaken, etc. But here again, if we can speak at all of error at all, it is because of our capacity for truth. The primary datum than whether in perceptions or in any other way of coming to know it is our capacity of for the truth, but ever grouping mind for the truth, the wonder of mysteriousness of reality, and the admittedly limited means to attain its by to temporal conditionings and historicity of human beings, the physical and physiological barriers, disease of the senses, weariness and laziness, vices and prejudice in inadvertence and non-challenge, etc., remains always subject to error, but also and at the same time capable of recognize the error and overcome it, but this means too that our knowledge of reality remains always practical, imperfect, relative, not realistic, certain up to a certain extent and certain up to another. 4.7, let's sum up. In this unit we have seen the four permanent theories of truth and spoken of error as related to and different form truth. The correspondence theory says that truth is the additions of the mind to the object. In other words, truth is the correspondence between what I affirm of on Danny what is really this is the case. Coherence theory of truth interprets truth as the coherence between of prepositions and the other well established through prepositions. If it can be shown that his prepositions does not contradict these well established prepositions, that it can be called true by pragmatic theory of truth. William James speaks more in terms of meaning of view of life. If an assertions and the view of the life which is thus made up of such assertion function satisfactorily in my life, if in other words it gives meaning and purpose to my life, then the assertions and view of life are true. Of course they may be true to me and not to you. James applies this also to religious prepositions, expressives of religious beliefs, and in the he is followed by others more recent thinkers of whom we shall speak later in a related but different context. No matter how a perceptual error is to be explained, it is to be noted that if we can speak of perceptual error at all, that is, if we somehow or other can some to detect it and so that it is an error, it is because paradoxically enough sense perceptions is fundamentally reliable.